Okay, this is Adam Stevenson, and today I'm going to be doing a a tutorial on using npm, Bower, gulp, angularjs, and typescript. I'm going to be building a search experiment, and in the search experiment we'll have an input field and a list of movies, and when the person types input, we'll filter the movies based on their name. And we'll import this to use a web API, and we'll also add some unit tests to make sure that what we're doing is correct. And of course, all of this will be very modular. Okay, so the first thing we'll do is we'll create a file, new project, ASP.NET Web Application Search Experiment. Okay, we'll create a web API because we're going to be using that logic later. Inside of here, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change startup.cs and add app.use default files. This means that when I stick a index.html file in here, it'll serve it up by default. Index. Hello world. Control F5 to serve the page in my default browser. It defaults to the API. I want the base URL. We serve up hello world. Next thing I'm going to do is install the package managers. First is going to be Bower. These are package managers for JavaScript files. So to make sure I get the right ones, I'm going to quickly grab these references. And when I save this file, it will go out and pull these in automatically for me and install them in the lib folder. So similarly, I'm using Bower for front-end packages, and I'm going to use npm for server-side packages. That's the way most people do it. And so now I'm going to paste in my Bower dependencies. Or sorry, the npm dependencies. So once these are pulled in, actually I can get going. I'm going to start adding the Bower dependencies to my page. I'm going to add Angular, just the min JavaScript file. And then I'm going to go over to Bootstrap. And in Bootstrap, I will add bootstrap.css to the top of my page. And then also, I will add jQuery before Angular. So right now, I could start writing Angular stuff to my page. But before I do that, I'm just going to add some boilerplate Bootstrap code. I'm going to add a nav bar at the top, and I'm going to add give me a second here. Where is it? I'm going to add a basic heading as well in a separate one. So you might be asking yourself, well, why did he put the JavaScript at the bottom? It's because the JavaScript blocks loading the page if you put it at the top. It's more important to load the HTML elements than it is to load the JavaScript fast, so that's why the JavaScript gets loaded last. So right now, if I F5 the page, we should see a more pretty, I'm going to Control F5 again. We should see a more pretty web page, except our body is up at the top of the page. So what we're going to do is we're going to add a new item, CSS, a new folder, site, CSS, add new item, CSS, site.css, and I'm just going to give body.content container a padding top of 65 pixels, and then I'm going back to the index and adding content container there. So now if I refresh, fingers crossed. Oh, I forgot to add site.css to the top. That's why it's not showing up. Or the stylings that I just added aren't showing up. So then refresh this. There we go. Looks a bit nicer. So now we can start writing some Angular code. So I'm just going to add ng-app, and then inside of here I'm going to add a 2. And so then when I refresh the page, we see the 2, of course. That's not really fancy, but if I did 2 plus 2, it would get evaluated to 4. That's because everything inside of the curly braces gets evaluated because it's inside of an ng-app. So this means that I could throw on a div row here, below here. Give me a second. I could throw on a div row with the input here. And if I set that model to be, let's say query on the input field, and then let's say down below here, I put query as well. If I refresh the page, we will now see a two-way binding. So when I type hello world, we see hello world below. And this is because we bound the input field to the query object, which exists on the scope of our ng-app, and we've also bound this generic text on the page to be query, which we can't edit directly. Okay, so let's get a little bit more advanced. So we're going to start writing some TypeScript now. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go back to my base project. I'm going to create a new folder called app. And app is where I store all of my TypeScript files. So before I dive too deep into TypeScript, I'm just going to go give a quick shout out to typescriptlang.org. This is the language's website. So if you go here and click play, you'll be sent to this page that has this nice functionality of it has TypeScript on the left and JavaScript on the right. So a TLDR of what TypeScript is a superset of JavaScript. And so this means that it contains a lot of nice language features that do not exist in JavaScript, such as classes, interfaces, and a lot of support for modularizing your code, and just general type safety. So all of these things, while nice, mean that it can be compiled down to JavaScript using just the features that JavaScript supports, because it's a superset. And so this means that stuff like typing and that and a couple other language features, while they exist in TypeScript, don't exist in the JavaScript that gets compiled. So for example, we'll have this class greeter, and a greeter has a type greeting of type string. So this means that if I assign this dot greeting to be, let's say, a number instead of a string, TypeScript is probably going to say, yeah, there's a problem here. A number is not assignable to a string. However, this could just as easily be compiled to JavaScript under the assumption that nothing's working. So there's compile time flags to say if error exists in the TypeScript code, do not compile it to JavaScript. This object is getting compiled to an IFI that essentially scopes the object such that its properties don't exist in the global namespace, or the global namespace, which is nice. So when we write TypeScript, it will get compiled to JavaScript, and then the browser will interact with the TypeScript, or sorry, the JavaScript that it was compiled to. Another important part with TypeScript is definitely typed libraries. So for all the major JavaScript libraries, there usually exists a definitely typed TypeScript library. And so you can imagine TypeScript libraries as just being interfaces, and the JavaScript library being themselves the implementation. So it's an open source community, so people are actively maintaining these interfaces And you can write code that will call those interfaces, and then when it gets compiled to JavaScript and run in the browser, it will work 100% fine with the JavaScript implementation when you call it. So moving back to our project, we're going to add a new TypeScript file in our app folder where all the TypeScript goes, called app.module.ts. I think I added a CSS file. Add new item TypeScript app.module.ts. So in here, I'm going to create a TypeScript module called search experiment. And inside of there, I want to use angular.module. But we're not really getting any type completion. And this is because I haven't added the definitely type file for Angular. So I'm going to open up a command line in the project's root directory, and I'm going to use a command called tsd for TypeScript definition. This can be installed using npm, going npm install globally tsd. I'm going to go tsd install, make sure I type that right, Angular, save resolve, just because I want to make sure. I think Angular has a dependency on jQuery, so it pulled in them both. It automatically created a typings file and pulled in Angular and jQuery. So now if I type Angular .module, I can create an Angular module, which I'm going to name search experiment, and have no dependencies. And so you might be wondering, well, how does this file know about the stuff over in Angular, typings angularjs d.ts? And what Visual Studio does really nice is it pulls in all the TypeScript files and it figures out the references for you. However, other compilers might not be so nice, or other IDEs might not be so nice as well. So if you need to add references like that, you can just drag and drop the reference yourself. But I'm not going to be doing that because I use Visual Studio. So we now have this module, and in our app.module, I'm going to create a class called Hello World Controller. And our Hello World Controller is just going to be some basic page information. We're going to have a title, and we're going to have some text. And a TypeScript construct called a constructor is going to initialize those values. All properties on TypeScript classes are accessed using this. So this title is going to be equal to Hello World Controller title. And I'll set this text equal to this is Hello World Controller text. So now on our module that we just generated, I'm going to add a controller. And the controller is going to have a name, Hello World Controller. And I like using single. And I'm going to pass it the Hello World Controller. And so that we just generated in code. And so this associates with the Hello World Controller name, this object that we just created. And anytime anyone uses a variable named that, we will use dependency injection to inject this object. So if I go back to our index.html, I want it in here. Save this, go back to index.html. On line 25, I want to add an ng controller. On line 24, first I'm going to add the app equal to the module name that we created, which was search experiment. And the ng controller is going to be Hello World Controller. And we need to be very careful about the casing being the same as the name I gave it. And I'm going to alias it as VM. So this means that inside of our TypeScript, inside of our expressions, Angular expressions in the page, we can reference VM. So I'm going to access the title, and I'm going to access the text. And so if I ran this right now, these expressions would get evaluated, but they wouldn't get evaluated to anything because we haven't referenced our JavaScript code. So Visual Studio automatically compiled our TypeScript file that we wrote into a JavaScript file that looks a bit more complicated, but essentially does the exact same thing. So what I need to do is I need to create a new folder called app, and I need to copy in app.module.js, and I'm going to reference that in my page. So now if I go localhost and refresh, I'm going to make sure I control F5 here and go to the home page. Here we go. We got our Hello World controller title. This is Hello World controller text, and this is the values that we populated. These are the values that we populated using the controller. And so you might note that it's really painful that I had to copy this JS file over to there, and if we got multiple JS files, that'd be even more painful. And if I made a change to the TypeScript file, I'd need to manually copy it over. And so this is where Gulp is going to come in. Gulp is a task runner that does things that you could do yourself, but automates them in a nice way. So I'm going to add a Gulp file here, JavaScript of JavaScript type. And for right now, I'm just going to copy in some stuff, and I'll explain it later, or in 10 seconds here. And I'm also going to create one more file called add new item, gulp.config.js. So in gulp.config.js, I'm just referencing the paths of all the major things. TypeScripts are all under app. The typings are all installed under typings. Make sure to output the TypeScript to www app, and we only have a single view and a single CSS page right now. So going back to gulpfile.js, at the top of the file, I reference pretty much all of the packages I brought in using package.json, as well as the configuration that I wrote in the other page. And then I'm going to have a task for linting, which is essentially going to check the style guide. It's going to take all the TypeScript files. I'm going to have a task for compiling. And what it's going to do is it's going to take all the TypeScript files, which includes all the TypeScript files and all their typings. No, linting doesn't require the typings because it doesn't do any compiling checkings. And one more annoying thing about the current state of the website that I forgot to mention is if I go to the scripts and I look at the scripts that are associated with the website using Firebug, which is just a common web debugger. You could use any web debugger you wanted. You'll note that the app.module.js is included, which makes sense. But we wrote our code in TypeScript, so it would be a lot better if we were able to debug using TypeScript. So if I put a breakpoint on line 8 and I refresh, you'll note that you'll note that we break here as we're generating our controller with the values for the page. So in my compile step, I make sure to generate the source maps, which helps the browser go from the JavaScript file that exists in the page to the TypeScript files that you would like to debug using. And then finally, at the bottom of the page, I serve up a static website on port 3000, and I watch all of the important files. And if there's a change in them, then I compile my TypeScript and I reload the page. So this is very helpful for if you're making changes, the changes get pushed to the browser. And so I'll showcase this right now. So I open up a command line in the base directory of the root of the project folder, and previously I have an npm install globally gulp, and so now I can just do gulp serve, and this should use all the tasks that I just explained. And it should, in a second here, open up my default browser, which is Firefox, localhost 3000. All goes well. There we go. And it appears we loaded successfully. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to go and make a change to the app.module.tr. Sorry. Actually, one thing I'm going to make the change first is I'm going to remove our app.module, because we now compile to a app.js instead of app.module.js. And so this app.js represents the concatenation of all the compilations of any TypeScript file that is in the app folder. So now if I refresh the page, nothing should change. But if I go to app.module.ts and set the title to something new, and I save, in the background we're compiling and linting, and then we should push this to we should push this to the web page. I don't know. It was a bit confused there for a second, but I think I just need to save something. So there it is. And if I go and change that back and save, I think I need to close the JavaScript files. I think that's what's confusing it. It should be happy again. Yeah, I think the problem was I had the JavaScript files open. So there we go. It's back to Hello World controller title. Awesome. So now we have the ability to push data from TypeScript to the page. And so what we'll do right now is we'll actually scrap our Hello World controller, and we'll start making our own search controller. And so what I'm going to do right now is I'm just going to delete that little header section, and I'm going to leave the app being search experiment, but I'm going to delete that controller. And what we're going to do in app is I like to follow a specific style, which is features get their own little folders. And inside of and we're going to create a search feature. So inside of there, I make a new TypeScript file called search.module.ts. And so in here, we use a sub namespace of search experiment called search experiment.search, and we're going to generate a new Angular module called search experiment.search. And this is just personal preference that I named it exactly the same as the TypeScript. There's no requirement to do that. It's just personal preference. And so then in our search folder, I'm also going to now create a new TypeScript file called search controller. And in here, I'm still in the TypeScript namespace search experiment.search. And I'm going to create a class called a search controller. And the search controller is going to have a query, which is of type string. And it will also have movies, which right now I'm just going to put type any. Type any is kind of the TypeScript equivalent of accepting like everything, as the name would suggest. So whereas TypeScript normally cares a lot about the type, if you put any, it's kind of a hackish way of getting around that while you're kind of generating your types, so you aren't getting errors. So what I can do is I'm going to create a constructor, and the constructor will initialize this query to be initialized query just to see if everything's working. And then movies is this movies. TypeScript properties on classes are accessed using this, by the way, is going to be an array. And right now I'm going to chuck just a couple movies in there, and I'm going to just create them on the fly objects. So I'm going to create one called dodgeball. I'm going to create 3 of these, so bear with me. 2005, and then I'll have a description of, and I'll copy that in. And I'm going to copy that, 1, 2, and paste in a couple names and a couple years, and paste in their personal descriptions. Okay, so now we've got a new controller with a query and some movies associated with it, and we need to add it to the module search experiment dot search. So one we just created in search dot module, and I'm going to add a controller called search controller and give it the name, or give it the object search controller. So this means, so there's no requirement that the controller's name be the same as the object's name that's passing in. It's just common practice that I like to follow. So this means that anytime someone asks for a search controller, we will use dependency injection and pass the search controller object that we created. So then the last thing I need to do is on the more general Angular module, I need to add a dependency on search experiment.search, and I'm just going to double check all of these names are the same. So this references search experiment.search. This creates it, this gets it, and then we add a controller. So then going back to index.html, on line 25, I'm going to add an ng controller, which says, which is going to be called search controller, and I'm going to alias it as VM. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ng model is VM dot what did I call it? Query, I believe. So if I go back to our page, fingers crossed if all goes well, I'm going to shut down and serve again. It should pop up in a second here. I don't put it past myself that I didn't screw anything up here. So this is called search controller, and this is called search controller. Oh, so in the background the website opened up, and the input text box is initialized to initialize query, which means that everything should be hunky-dory, and it doesn't look like we got any errors in our page. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to open up my own page here, and I'm going to add now to our index something that will accept a list of movies. And so the problem here is that I put the ng controller, it's scoped on the element that it's given in. So what I'm just going to do to solve this is I'm going to just move it up one layer right now. So then it's scoped for this entire block. And so now I can go ng repeat vm.movies. For each vm.movie, I put the name, I put the year in parenthesis, and then I put the description. So if I save this, we're hitting some breakpoints, it's just fine. We now see our 3 movies that I initialized. So right now we have the 3 movies that exist as objects in our controller, and we're pushing those to the website. The problem being that with Angular, you really want to keep the controllers as thin as possible. You want to keep the controllers as thin as possible. And so you want to export this logic for getting the movies probably to some external thing called a service. Services are generally responsible for applying business logic to data and retrieving data. And so what we're going to do now is we're going to create a search service, and as we build up the search service, we'll also start writing some unit tests to ensure that service is doing what we intend it to do. The first thing I'm going to do, however, is add a new TypeScript file called search models, and this will just be a under the module search experiment.search, and I'm going to create an interface. This might be the first time you see one of these, called iMovie. Generally, interfaces start with the letter I, capitalized, and I'm just going to give it a name, just like the objects I was creating. A year, which is the number, and a description, which is the string. And so in going back to the search controller, now I can go array of type iMovie, search. This is the getcha. If you create stuff like in separate files, you need to make sure you export it. So now I can use an array of iMovie. This is syntactically no different, or this is just syntactic sugar for iMovie array. And so you'd be asking, well, why do you do that? What do you get from using that versus any? Well, I mean, the JavaScript won't look any different at the end of the day. But what is going to be different is we can now add a new object, and when I create that new object, I get auto-completion based off of the name of the implied type that it should be, which is really nice. The other thing I forgot to mention while showing off the new website is if I inspect with Firebug and I go look at the included script files, we now see TypeScript. In fact, we don't see the initial AngularJS at all. And so this means that if I go to the search controller, which I'm in right now, and I put a breakpoint, this is TypeScript, and I refresh the page, we're now debugging through TypeScript, which is really nice. And it does that if I go to, by looking at app.js at the bottom, there's going to be the source map, which describes how to go back to the TypeScript files. Okay, so going back to extracting our movies to a service, what I want to do is I'm going to add a new item, TypeScript file, and it's going to be a search service. It's going to be module search experiment dot search, and we're going to create an interface called iSearch service, and it's going to take it's going to have a search method which takes a query of type string, and that will return an array of iMovie, right? This is the interface, so there's no implementation. Then we create a class called a search service, and it's going to implement our iSearch service, of course. And so if I just sat here, it would get mad at me because I don't implement those. So now, if I add a search method, search takes a query string. I can name the parameter what I want, but I'll keep it the same. iMovie, that's the return type after the colon. And right now I'm just going to return null. It's not going to do what we want, but it's going to do something. And then I'm also going to have a constructor. And I'm going to copy over the movies from my controller over to my service. So the movies exist in the service, but when we search, we just return null. So I think now is a good time as any to, yeah, and you'll note that if we go back to the home page, we're kind of broken because there's no movies, but we're fine with that for right now. Right now is as good as time as any to start writing some tests. So I put all my TypeScript tests in a test folder, and I write all my TypeScript tests using TypeScript as well. So I'm going to create a new TypeScript file called hello world tests.ts, and inside of it I'm going to use Jasmine, which is going to have a describe. If you're asking where's the autocomplete, it's because I haven't installed the TSD definitions yet, so I need to go TSD install. One I'm going to need is Angular mocks, save, resolve, and the other one I'm going to need is Jasmine. And so I'll go through those in a second. Jasmine, save, resolve. Cool. So we brought those in, and if I open up typings, crap, I was in the wrong. Was I in the wrong folder? I think I'm in the wrong folder. Close all but this, like this, alt space. Mux. TSD install Jasmine. Yeah, I was in the wrong folder. It was installing them in tests. Okay. Cool. Looks like we got it all now. So now if I type describe, it knows about it. But before I write any tests, I need to add our test framework. And we're going to be using Karma. And so what I like to do is I've globally installed Karma. This is a test running framework. And so I can now go Karma init, and it's going to give me some options. First it'll ask the test running framework, which is Jasmine. The test framework, which is Jasmine. I don't require use require.js. I want to use phantom.js as the browser that I want to run my tests in. And then you could add the source files. I'll add them manually later. And you could add any swap files. And do you want Karma to sit and watch for changes? And sure, we'll add that. And so you'll note that it added a karma.conf.js to our file, to our project. And what I need to do now is I need to add the files that I want it to test against. So first of all, you need to include all the references. And those need to go first. Be loaded first, and then you can load your own code, and then you can load the tests. And my own code is the compiled TypeScript code, which is output in this folder. So now if I go describe, you describe the test. So this is hello world tests, and then you pass it a lambda function. And inside of here, you give it individual tests, should pass. It's going to be our first one. And what we'll do is we'll just say expect true dot to be true. So now if I go to our make sure I got a couple of these open. If I go to my command line, I still got the compilation process running in the background. I'm going to go Karma start, and this will run Karma using phantom.js if all goes well. No browser captured. What I'm going to do just to get this working is I'm just going to copy in a working Karma config over here. That references those same files, and try running this again. I'm going to take a quick break and debug this now, because this is a weird problem. Be back in a bit. So coming back, I was running the tests from a subfolder where the Karma conf wasn't defined, and so I just need to go up to the base root folder and run karma.start, and that looks for a karma.conf.js, which we previously defined. And if I run this now, we run it using phantom.js, which is just in the command line, and we get a single success. So going back, I can now define a should fail test and pass it a function and expect true dot to be false, and that should update right away. And we get one failed. And and it gives us some information about where it happened. So now going back, what I'm going to do is I'm going to close this and I'm going to delete that test because it's not very useful. And what I actually want to do is I want to add a new item called a, and I want to call it search service test. And I'm going to describe, sorry, add it as a JavaScript file. I'm going to rename this. No, I'm just going to delete it. Search service tests. And I'm going to describe search service tests. Pass it a lambda function. Whoops. And inside of there, what I want to do is I need to, I'm going to have a var search service of type search experiment.search.iSearch and then the problem is going to be, well, why isn't that auto-completing for you? That's because I didn't export the interface. So if I go over to here, export this, go back, should be happy now in a second. Did I not export it? Nice. I search service. So then, before each, I'm going to inject a lambda function, and I'm going to angular.mock.module, and this is using the Angular mocks search experiment. So this is going to help me with testing. So before each, I'm going to also run a second function called inject into a function called search, a parameter called search service of type search experiment.search.iSearch service. So in the search experiment.search module, we associated with all parameters named search service return a search service class, and that implements this interface that we've defined. And so now we've told Angular mocks to go mock out that generic module that contains the submodule that the services defined it. And now we're going to inject into this our search service. And so we're going to capture that by going lowercase search service equals capital case search service. So we can use it in our test. So then we should say it should exist, and pass that a lambda function, and we expect search service to be defined. If it wasn't defined, then there's a problem with our dependency injection. And so just to confirm that we're compiled, I'm going to run the compilation, and then I'm going to run the test again. And we're getting an error that's not expected. And the error is that injector search service. So I need to check. I think I know what the problem is. If I go to my search service, I never actually add it to the module. So I need to go at the bottom, angular.module, search experiment.search. And I'm using the getter, and I'm adding a service of type of name search service, and passing the one that we defined. So if I save that, I go back to the test. Heyo, we're passing. The errors can be a bit confusing at times, but it was enough to get me to where I need to be fairly quickly, which is good. So then right now I'm just going to define a brain dead simple test, because we're not doing good functionality, that it should return null when searching. And what we can do is we can arrange, follow good TDD principles, act search service dot search, pass the query, and then we get those results, and then we assert that we expect result dot to be null. So then if I run that, by saving it, we see 2 tests, and then if I change this dot not dot to be null and save that, we get 1 fail. So this is definitely doing what we expected. So going back to the search service, I'm just gonna write some filter code right now. So I'm gonna return this .movies.filter. So this is gonna accept a value of type iMovie, and what it needs to return is a boolean where value.name dot to lowercase dot index of query dot to lowercase is greater than -1, so it contains it. I think that should close it off. So now if I go back to my tests, I should get 1 failure now, which is expected because we're not returning null anymore. So then let's switch to this should return not null when search, because at the very least we should return an empty array. And so now it should return dodgeball when searching dodgeball. So right now we'll kind of hard code it for the data that we're searching against, just to make sure that it's doing what we expect it to do. So I'm going to go var query equals dodgeball, because that's one of the names of the movies that we're using, and var result equals search service dot search query, and then assert expect result dot length equal 1. So we go back, we got 3 passes now, 1 for each of these tests. Awesome. So now going back to our app and search controller, what we want to do is we want to use the search controller in, or sorry, our search service in our search controller. And in fact, we'd want to add a search method on our search controller to be called from the view of type void that returns type void, and this would set we'd have a set of movies associated with our search controller to display, and this would be of type array iMovie, and this .movies is going to be equal to the search service, or however we get that .search for the empty string to begin with. We'll initialize it to all of our data. And so what we need to do is we need to use static inject search service into our constructor. So this will take a search service of type iSearch service. And so what I just added is saying inject into the first parameter the thing that matches search service. And that's why we need to pass it the string, array string, into inject. And then this iSearch service is strictly typing on our side. It doesn't tell Angular that you need a thing of type iSearch service. Angular does it strictly off the name we put in here. And so now what we'd want to do is we'd want to hold up a search service of type iSearch service in a local variable, and on line 11 go this dot search, this dot search service equals the injected search service. And once again, we probably want to generate tests to ensure that this is initialized correctly after our constructor, but we won't for now. So then what I can do is this dot search service dot search to initialize the movies, and similarly, on line 17, what I'll do is I'll search against this dot query. But we have no way of calling that right now. So at the very least, what we want to do is, if I refresh this, get rid of these breakpoints, we now see our 3 movies back again, and we see the initialized query. But we have no way of filtering. So we're going to do that by adding a new folder called common. And inside of there, the practice is you always add the common.module.ts, and we follow the same TypeScript naming convention, which is module search experiment .common, and on there an angular .module, and give that a name search experiment .common. And once again, to reiterate, you don't need to name it the same as the TypeScript class. TypeScript namespace, I just do. And then in here, we're going to create a new Angular directive, which is essentially allows us to define HTML attributes on elements, and then do custom logic on those elements. And so I'm going to create an enter directive. And in my enter directive, I'm going to be in the same module, TypeScript module search experiment.common. And I'm going to have an interface, which won't make any sense right now, but I'll explain it, which extends ng.iAttributes. It's be my enter of type any. And on angular.module, we're going to create a search experiment. On the search experiment.common module, we're going to create a new directive of the name myEnter, and we're going to pass it a function, which is going to return a function because it takes a directive factory. And the first parameter is going to be NGI scope. So this is essentially just the scope of the element. The second parameter is a NGI augmented jQuery, and so this is the jQuery element that the directive is associated with. And then finally we have the iEnter. I want to make sure I type that correctly. Attributes. And so the iEnter attributes extend ng attributes. Ng attributes are all the HTML attributes that have the ng in front of them, like the ng app, the ng controller, the ng model that we've seen already. And essentially what I'm going to do is I'm going to define my own one that extends those, so it's going to be called myEnter. And then when I see a myEnter, what I want to do is I want to call the function that's going to be stored in myEnter. What we can do right now, actually, no, never mind. Let's stick with this. Element.bind key down to, and this is going to take an event object, jQuery event object. It's going to be a lambda function. And if the event object which is the key code, is 13, which is the enter key code, then we want a scope.apply a function, which is going to scope.eval attributes attrs.myEnter. So what's happening? On the jQuery event key down, we're going to check if the key down is 13. If it is, then evaluate the myEnter function, just like we evaluated 2 plus 2. You could have a function call to a controller in there, and that we'll have the function call to search. And then scope.apply says any changes to the controller that occur while this function is getting called, apply them to the view. So if we change the movies but didn't nest that inside a scope.apply, we wouldn't see a change in the view at all. So right now, what I have to do is I need to go over to app.module and take a dependency on the new common module that exists. Common. And so at the end of the day, I could chuck everything in search experiment, but we're creating these submodules to kind of separate the logic of distinct parts of our application. So going back to www.root, what I'm going to do is I'm going to add a new attribute on here called myEnter, and make that equal to vm.search. So vm.search searches the method on the search controller. You're going to ask, well, why is it my-enter, where we just described it as myEnter? That's because camel casing gets separated into dashes like this by AngularJS. And so if all goes well, I think this makes sense that what we're doing is going to work. So if I go to our page and I reload the page, and for whatever reason Firebug has buggy debug breakpoints, if I type dodgeball, as I type it doesn't do anything, but when I press enter, it doesn't do anything either right now. So what I'm going to do, just to ensure that everything's working correctly, is I'm going to make sure we're running correctly, or we've compiled. We're serving the most recent. And while it's updating, I'm going to check all the code that we just changed. So we added an we added a search experiment.common. Search experiment.common. So let me make sure those are typed exactly the same. That's important. And then over in app.module, we also added search experiment.common. And then over in our search controller, we have a search function that we should be calling, and it will call the search service, which is injected, hopefully. It definitely is injected because we saw this .movies initialized. So if I type dodgeball again and press enter, we aren't doing anything. So I'll walk you through some debugging. So right now, if I open up scripts, I go to search controller, and what I would expect to see is line 17 gets called when I press enter. But I strongly believe that that isn't the case. And so what I'm going to do right now, since that's not working, is I'm going to go to my search experiment. I'm going to go to my enter directive, because I strongly believe I probably mistyped something in there. And just to see if this is going to work, I'm going to copy in something that I know works 100%. It looks like there's no change. Dodgeball. Oh, now we're hitting. Awesome. And when I press enter, there we go. So there must have been some small typo I made. Cool. So now if I get rid of everything, they're back. If I just type E, they all have an E. If I type LL, I think it should just be the two of them. Awesome. We're working. And we would also have linked up the click event to this to search, but for now we won't worry about that. So what's the next step? The next step is let's abstract out the search service to a web API. So I'm going to go over to I'm going to create a new folder for my C# models, and in here I'm going to create a new item called a movie. Yeah, not a movie TypeScript file, but a movie class. New class. And inside of here, it's definitely not correct style, but I'm going to keep it lowercase so the JSON objects are generated correctly. This will be an int year get set. My JSON objects in TypeScript are lowercase, so when I convert from C# to JSON, I need to keep them the same casing, or else JavaScript gets confused. So I just have a basic movie entity, and now I'm going to create a new class called the movies repository, which will have a public static list of movie. Yeah. And what else was I going to say? And this is going to be called the movies DB, and it will equal a new static, or no, just a new list of movies, and it will accept a new movie name. What I can do to be efficient is grab these because they're the same casing. Go over here. So get these to the same indentation. Alt select the lines. New movie. Space, and then replace the colon with an equals in the selection. So now we should be happy. So then if I go to our web API controllers and I create a new class, web API controller class, if I go movies controllers, API controller. So then what we're going to do is we're going to provide a public a JSON result get, which takes a string search, string query, and what it's going to do is it's going to go return, it's going to go var results equals movies repository, then add that reference, and then movies.db.where m.name.toLower, and there's a fancier way of doing this, but this is what we're going to do. Query.toLower, and then return JSON and pass those results back in. So if I control F5 because this web API needs to run in IIS, if I go movies, yeah, and then I go query equals hello world, movies, get movies. Let me call this. What has this guy? Oh, API. Yep, that's the problem. I need API/movies. Query equals hello world. So query equals dodgeball. Query equals nothing, then we get a null exception error because we go query is null, and then query.toLower blows up. So I'm going to go if query equals null, then query equals an empty string. And there's definitely a fancier way of passing an empty string, but we're going to hack it through using that right now. So then if I go back to our search service, we go back to using search service, which is an app search service. Instead of having these constant movies, I'm going to comment that out. And what we'd want to do is instead we want to inject an HTTP of type ng.ihttp service. And so because we're injecting, we use the static money inject equals money HTTP, and that injects a thing with that name into the first parameter in the constructor. And then over in there, let's keep track of the HTTP service of type ng.ihttp service, and store that in a local variable. And then instead of applying the filters like this, what we're going to do is we're going to go http service, this.http service.get, and we'll get the API /movies money. What's the exact syntax? Query equals plus the query that was passed in. And then since this is all asynchronous, then once that completes, we are going to get a promise value back, and that's going to be of type ng.ihttp promise callback arg. And so right now we're going to say that that type is going to be known, and that's going to be an iMovie array because we've defined the API ourselves. And then with that, we're going to return the promise value .data. And so instead of returning an iMovie array, this type is an I promise to return an iMovie array. I believe I haven't screwed something up too horribly. I need the closing bang. So then what we're going to do is instead of returning the movie, we're going to return an ng.iPromise of type iMovie array. And since we've changed the implementation, we're also going to need to change the interface as well, which is also going to change our tests, because instead of returning a array, we now return an iPromise. And so right now I'm just gonna kind of delete those tests, and we'll forget about those for now. And so then going back to our search service, we're going to return the value from this then expression. Should be happy now. And then if we go back to the search controller, when we initialize the movies, we can just initialize query to be the empty string, and initialize the search service, and then call this .search, because query will be nothing to begin with. And then instead of initializing movies like this, and then down in search, what we're going to do is, since we now return a promise, then the promise value will be of iMovie array type. What we want to do with that is we go this dot movies equals the promise value, and we can refer to this inside of this scope because Lambda functions have a special scope where you can use this of the color. If I used a function that wasn't a Lambda, then this would be the scope of the function, and so this would be not the right this to use. So that's why lambda functions are a bit funky. So if I'm following correctly, if I control F5 now, we should be able to load our dodgeball interstellar find Nemo. And if I go dodgeball, enter, we're now just confirming that we're using our web API. I can put actually I can't put a breakpoint if I'm controlled F5, but yes, we are indeed using the web API to get these search results. Enter, yeah. Okay, so what we've done is we've built a simple search application, and we've gone through the processes of unit testing that search application and keeping our search application modularized by both taking advantage of TypeScript syntax and language features of AngularJS, i.e. the double module trickiness, as well as we've used Gulp and Karma as a framework to do a lot of automatic stuff for us in the background, so we can kind of work without needing to worry about doing any building for ourselves, which is the way it should be. Programmers should be writing the code, and the build should be working in the background, checking that code for them, compiling that code for them. So thank you for watching, and I'm going to continue to investigate AngularJS as a framework. I'm very excited to work with it. It seems really powerful and precise. Thanks for watching again. Bye now.